Hey, welcome back to Max Nave Horsemanship again. And today, well, you get yourself real comfortable, sit down in a real comfortable chair and fill your cup up with whatever your favorite beverage happens to be. And I'm not asking questions what's in that cup, believe me. Don't want to know. But get comfortable because I got a story to tell you. It might be kind of a long one, and it's my story. This story is kind of starts, well, with some questions that somebody asked recently and made some comments in one of my videos and asked some real good questions. And I've talked about some of this stuff before in a few other videos, but it's been a while and I've never told the whole story. So I thought maybe today we'll tell you the whole story because it kind of tells you all about who I am, what I do, and where I'm at, how I got here. Well, just a whole bunch of stuff. And the questions that I got asked were really good ones and would take me way too long to answer in a message or in the comments, reply to one of them. So I thought, I'm just going to do a video. I'm going to tell you the whole story, right? Start the beginning. And, well, the beginning actually goes a long ways back. And it really doesn't have a lot to do with horses back then, but it, well, sort of does in a way. Not horses exactly, but animals. You see, well, let's start from the beginning. Well, maybe it's not quite the beginning, but as far back as we need to go. From the time I was a little wee guy. I don't know, somewhere in there. I don't remember. I recall my age was single digits back then. And, well, I'd be the kid out at the lake laying on his belly on the ground with a handful of breadcrumbs feeding the squirrels. And I'd observe the squirrels and I'd look at their coats and their eyes and their little paws that looked like little hands on the front. And I'd watch them eat and, scurry back and forth and they'd climb up my arm. And I really enjoyed that stuff. And I should probably say I've always had a bit of an affection for animals in general, pretty much all kinds. Always liked just about any kind of animal. And, well, growing up at home, we always had a dog too, so I always had a bit of connection with dogs. And in my later years, I ended up adopting a lot of dogs. Yeah, I'd pick up strays and bring them home. Well, not when I was living with my parents. It was actually after I'd moved out on my own I'd do this because they wouldn't have tolerated it. They weren't real good that way. But when I had my own place, I was quite often bringing home stray dogs and finding new homes for them. And, well, that's just kind of been my attitude towards animals all the time. I've always appreciated them. I mean, there's certain ones I'm not crazy about. Well, for example, I'm not overly fond of cats, but I don't dislike them. You got to understand this, I appreciate them for what they are. Do I want one living in my house? No, I do not. There are certain traits of the cat that I'm not fond of, but I don't dislike them. And I appreciate them for what they are. Pretty much every animal, even the wild ones that a lot of people consider to be pests, I can see their place in the world, and I can appreciate their place in the world. So, moving on from the time I was a little feller till I got a little older into my teens, and there was always something about horses. And I should remind you too, I didn't grow up in the country. I didn't grow up with horses. I grew up in the city. Yep, I was born and raised in the city, and didn't know a darn thing about horses, nothing at all. But there was something about them. There was beautiful, majestic animals that always held an attraction to me. I always liked them. And I'm not sure why. I don't know what it was, but, like I said, I liked all animals to begin with. So I guess that was kind of my start back then. And I always did have an attraction to horses. I'm not quite sure why. There was just something about them. And years later, after my first marriage, I don't recall who it was that gave them to me, but somebody realized I had a real appreciation of horses, and they gave me a couple books on horses even. Now, that was a long time ago, and the books were not real current back then. Today, they'd be just horribly dated. I don't have those books anymore, by the way, but it was still, obvious how much I liked horses to the point where somebody even bought me a couple books for Christmas one year, I think it was, and it was all about horses and horse care and various things like that. which, like I said, a lot of it was dated, and a lot of it actually, I think the one book for sure was written in another country too, because just some of the references they made to certain tack and the way they do things, it was very clear it wasn't from here. So after my first marriage, my sister-in-law, they left their farm and moved back to the city, but she kept her horse. She had a horse, and she brought it with her and was boarding it just outside of the city. And I made a little arrangement with her that I'd pay half the board and I'd get to ride the horse. Now again, at this time, I knew nothing about horses. Well, very little anyhow. And my lessons were not exactly elaborate. She showed me once how to put the saddle and bridle on, which was English, by the way, not Western. That was my first experience riding. And boy, I'm glad I didn't know anything about the myths and stereotypes of breeds back then, because that particular horse, my beginner horse, my first horse that I rode, which, by the way, I was in my 20s by this time. First time I ever rode a horse, I was in my 20s already. And this horse was half Arabian, half thoroughbred. If you believe the stereotypes, those are the two crazy breeds. That was my beginner horse. And she was actually a fairly good horse, although my sister-in-law had trained her herself, and, well, maybe it could have been done a little better. But personality-wise, she wasn't a bad horse at all. And even though I didn't have a clue what I was doing, I managed to teach that horse a few things and made her a little more enjoyable experience. And I really got hooked on her. I really got hooked on horses at that time. And as much as I did not like that saddle, it was very uncomfortable. And I've always had a bad taste for English saddles ever since. And I don't think that's fair to English saddles either, because I think that was just a bad one, at least for me. It didn't fit me well. So it was quite uncomfortable, but that didn't stop me from riding that horse. And I got on that horse probably 3-4 times a week for over a year, until they got another farm and moved on, and that was the last of that one. Well, my story after that, and I was thoroughly hooked on horses. My wife wouldn't let me have one. Well, years down the road, that marriage came to an end, and later on I got married again. That wife wouldn't let me have a horse either. And I always wanted a horse, but I was not allowed to have one. And being what I thought was a good husband, I just went along with it. It's okay, you don't want me to have one, I won't have one. I wasn't too happy about it. But many years down the road, well, didn't have wives anymore. I started getting horses. Well, at that point, I still didn't know much. But I'd heard about, a little bit about different ways of training, and some of the more traditional or old school methods. It just seemed way too harsh. And by that time, I'd actually worked with quite a few dogs too. And I'd learned that just from doing that there's always a better way of doing things. And some of the more traditional ways of doing things don't necessarily work, at least not very well anyhow. And the gentler you are, it seemed that the better things work. And that was actually, even before I had anything to do with horses, something you'll hear me repeat many times when it comes to horses is it is so much easier to prevent problems than it is to try and fix them. And I discovered that while working with dogs. And in fact, you can apply that to just about anything in life. It's much easier to prevent problems than it is to try and fix them after they occur. So anyhow, the dogs transitioned to horses. And although they're very, very different animals, I have to say they're very, very different. One is prey, one is predator. Your interactions are quite different with them. But a lot of things are the same. Preventing problems, consistency, absolutely. Consistency is just paramount for both of those animals. And I didn't know much, like I said, when I first started getting horses, I didn't know much. But it's just, they're beautiful animals. I loved them dearly, and just something about them attracted me. And eventually, I ended up with this one horse that Well, maybe I should back up a tiny bit before I get to that one. I bought one horse that, well, in retrospect, I think she actually would have been a really good horse, but being that I didn't know anything at the time, I couldn't help her with the few problems that she had, which for me were significant because it turned out she didn't like men. Now, a lot of people tell you that's not possible. Horses do not choose gender as far as whether they like men or women. Well, that all depends. In this case, as far as I can figure out, that horse had been abused by a man. And I watched the way she would relate to women. She had no problem with women. Men tried getting near her, and she wanted nothing to do with them. Even the previous owner, the wife could ride the horse, but the husband would get bucked off. So obviously there was something going on there. But like I said, back then I didn't know nothing. And well, I got horse after horse, and eventually I got this one old horse I went to go look at. Really liked, thought she'd be just right, just an old plug that just, I wasn't in any hurry. Well, I'm still not actually. And I thought, she'd be a good old girl, been there, done it, old horse. And well, there was a little more to that one, but I won't bother elaborating on that story. But when I went there, the guy actually had 3 horses for sale. And well, then he tells me the story that because they were moving, they had to get rid of these horses. They're moving into the city and didn't want to keep the horses. And whatever horses weren't sold by Tuesday were going to the auction that following weekend. Well, by that point, I'd already kind of gotten a little bit involved with the anti-slaughter movement and stuff like that. And I'd also done a little research that determined that the statistics were that 75% of all horses that get sold at auction wind up as meat. All 3 of these horses were completely rideable. Nothing wrong with them. They were trained, they were broke, they were healthy. No reason for them to go to auction. I didn't want to see that happening. And even though I only went to look at one, I ended up buying all 3. Well, I found homes for the other 2. And, well, it kind of progressed from there. And then next thing you know, I got another one. And when I got him, turned out it was a little bit worse than I thought. Well, I kept seeing this ad for this little guy. He was a fair ways away from me, but this little face just kept saying, please buy me, help me. Well, that's kind of the way I saw it. Just there was something about him that just, well, I got this little guy, and I figured, okay, he just needs to learn to trust. Again, because he was quite wary of humans. He was hard to catch and everything else. And, well, it was a longer story than that, but that was the basics. And so I thought, hey, I can handle that. I don't know much about horses, but, I know that if I approached them right, that they'll trust me, and I can work on that. I can fix that. Well, it turned out he was worse than I thought, and basically needed complete training right from beginning to end. I didn't know how to do that at the time, but I knew I had to learn. I had no choice. It's the only way I could help this guy, and even back then, I felt an obligation that I had to help him. That's my responsibility. I had to help this horse. So I had to figure out how to do it, and I didn't know how. Well, about that time, a friend of mine invited me over to their place and said, hey, you got to watch these DVDs. They had just purchased a set of DVDs from a trainer that, I can't remember if it was a 7 or 9 DVD set, but I got about halfway through the first one because I wanted to learn. And, well, the little light bulb goes on, and he was a good teacher. I don't necessarily, I know who this guy is today. He's still a very well-known horseman. He is actually quite good. I don't agree with all of his methods that he uses, but he is an extremely good teacher. And watching what he did, the way he did it, it was like the little light goes on. It's like, well, this is how you communicate with a horse. Well, this is simple. I can do that. Because at that time, back up a little bit, is just prior to watching those videos, is I wanted to learn how to train a horse, but I couldn't figure out where this secret training school was. Well, the reason I couldn't find the school is because it doesn't exist. There is no training school. And most of the knowledge when it comes to training is just passed down from generation to generation, and quite often it's not even written down, it's just verbal. So it's actually quite hard, and that's part of the reason I started doing these videos. Is it is very difficult to find information on horses, any at all, much less good information. And I like to think that what I'm providing is good, but let's not get carried away there. So I watched start watching these DVDs. Like I said, started to. I only got halfway through the first one, and the light went on. It's like, I can do that. I went home and I started working with one of my horses that I had at the time, and I discovered, hey, I can move 1,000 pounds without even touching it. This is neat. Well, that was the beginning. And that was where it all took off. Well, that little horse, I trained him right from scratch, beginning to end, till I got on him. And he, even to the day I sold him, though, he was still a little on the worried side. I didn't quite perfect things with him, but yeah, that was the first one. And even the people that bought him were quite amazed at what he did know. They didn't understand how I achieved that. Because all I had to do, they said, well, how is he with his feet? And I said, well, I don't know, let's check. And I said, foot, pointed at the foot I wanted, and he picked it up. And they thought that was pretty ridiculous. They'd never seen that before. I said, well, I thought all horses were supposed to. I didn't know. I just did what seemed right. And that's kind of, well, part of how I got into what I'm doing, or how I do things is, like I said, there was a lot of traditional, more old school methods that I thought were a little too harsh. Now, about that same time, the natural horsemanship movement was quite popular. Now, I've said before, there really is no such thing. There's no standard for it, so it doesn't really exist. But the general concept behind it is to do things naturally in a way that the horses can relate to. It's more easy for them to understand, and to also understand the nature of the horse. Well, at least that's the way I understand the gist of it. And so I thought, that's definitely going to be a better way to go, is, leaning towards that. But you know what? I think I can take it a step further, because I've always thought there was just a better way of doing things where, now I've heard of ways where, some people take a lawn chair out in the pasture and sit down and read a book and just wait for the horse to come to them. Well, I'm not quite that patient, so that doesn't work for me. But I totally appreciate and respect the people that do that, okay? I get it. Because if I had the patience and time to do stuff like that, I'd probably try something like that. But in the case of my one little horse I got, she's still with me, I couldn't have waited for her to come to me. I had to get in her face and basically prove that I was trustworthy and that it was okay to be with me. If I waited for her to come to me, I'd still be waiting to this day, many years later. So, anyhow. But, like I said, there was the old school traditional methods that I'd heard enough about that I just thought, no, that's not right. That's way too harsh. There's something wrong there. There's got to be a better way than that. And then there's the natural horsemanship stuff, which, well, even like I said, it doesn't really exist, but the general concept behind it was definitely much better. But I still thought I could take it a little further, which has always been my goal, is I'm a step ahead of them, and I honestly, I know for a fact I do go further than 99.9% of the guys that are practicing that stuff or claim to be practicing it. And that's just, how did I get to where I am? Well, okay, this is kind of where it goes that direction, is right at this point. Is, okay, I started off with that first little horse that I had that turned out needed complete training, and I had to learn. I had to learn how to train a horse, and that's kind of what started me. And, well, then I had a few more after that, and it always seemed that I got the ones that other people had kind of given up on, or didn't have time for, or facilities for, or whatever. And, I just made do with what I got and figured a way of doing things. And, well, that's kind of partly, I guess I'm suited to that in a way, because I should explain a little on how my brain works. And I know this sounds totally off topic, but it's not, because I have a very analytical mind. And over the years, I've done a lot of work that involved troubleshooting, whether it was mechanical, electronics, and things like that. And horsemanship really isn't a lot different to be effective. You have to analyze the problem and figure out what's causing it, not just the symptoms that you see. Because, well, if a mechanic or electrical technician or something was to repair symptoms only on their problems that they had in front of them, they'd never get the problem fixed. And I never really gave it much thought before on how that connects, but yeah, big time. If they address symptoms only, they're never going to fix the problem. Never, ever. They would never even figure out what it is if they're chasing symptoms. Because, and that's why for me, some of this stuff is really simple. It just makes sense to me. I can look around at things, situations, the world in general, and to me, there are things that are very, very obvious that other people don't even notice, and I find it a little frustrating because of the way my head works. To me, this stuff is so obvious. Why the heck can't you see it? Well, fact is, not everybody's head works like mine. But that also helps me with horses in a way, because then I realize, okay, if every human is different, so is every horse. And that helped me right there. And I had a couple of horses that were specifically very good teachers in that department because they were very unique. And they were not like the rest, and none of the traditional methods would have ever worked on them, I can guarantee. And to this day, I still have a couple like that. That's okay. I like that. I respect those horses. Those horses are with me for a reason, because I appreciate so much what they have given me, because they taught me, and well, that was one of the questions. Where'd you learn from? Well, no one place. I can assure you that. Every single horse I've ever been near has taught me something, and a couple of my own horses have taught me a lot. And then when it comes to methods and techniques that I know, some of them I've actually just made up by kind of figuring out things, troubleshooting. That's, like I said, this is how my head works. I'm a troubleshooter. I see a problem in front of me and I figure out, like I said, I've been saying many times in recent videos, never mind what, figure out the why. Okay? And so I look at this problem and I don't worry so much about the what, I figure out the why. And the horses have helped me do that. So between, horses teaching me things, figuring stuff out for myself sometimes, because a lot of the things that I have even demoed are things that I'm maybe somebody else is doing the same thing somewhere, I don't know, but there's a lot of stuff I've actually figured out for myself that I just made up because it just made sense. That would work, let's do it that way. So that's what we're doing. And well, of course, I've watched many, oh man, thousands, literally thousands of hours of videos of other horsemen. I've even seen a few in person. I've been to lectures. I've read articles, and it's not a case of I'm a particularly talented person when it comes to this stuff. I'm getting that way. I'm probably a long way ahead of a lot of people, but I've said many times in my videos, I'm nobody special. I'm not doing anything you can't do. If I can do it, you can do it. And that's one of those things that I emphasize, because that's a fact. If I can do it, you can do it. I'm nobody special. The only difference is that I make a conscious decision to learn, to observe the horse. Everyone I see, I observe how it behaves, how they interact with one another, how they interact with people, how people interact with their horses. And all this stuff is educational, every bit of it. And well, even before I owned my first horse, I probably did over 300 hours of research on hoof anatomy and mechanics, and that sort of thing, and trimming. I think I mentioned that before, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's stuff that, I don't expect anybody to be as extreme as me when it comes to stuff like that. But, it doesn't hurt to know this stuff. And when it comes to the training stuff, working with horses, I've said before, it's not the horse that needs training, it's the human. And that's another thing that I've learned. And, a lot of this is just from experience and, observations. It's like, if the person changes, the horse changes. But if the person isn't willing to change, guess what? The horse doesn't change. And they still keep having the same problems. One of the reasons that it's really hard to find good trainers, because the good ones are so fed up, they've quit doing it, because inevitably what ends up happening is, because the human does not change, the horse goes home, the problems all resurface, the trainer gets blamed. Because, well, they're the last one to work with the horse. Very sad. I hate that when that happens, but it happens a lot, unfortunately. And unfortunately, a lot of very good trainers have quit working with horses exactly for that reason, because they got no patience for that stuff. And, well, honestly, I don't have much patience for that either. And it has happened even to me, and I don't even charge people to work with their horses. I do it just because I love doing it. I guess I should elaborate a little more on what I do and how I do it and how I learned it. Like I said, thousands of hours watching videos, and this is all stuff you can do too. I didn't do anything that you can't do. You might not have access to as many horses as I've had in over the years. I've been very fortunate in that respect, and due to my life and lifestyle and whatever, I've had time on my hands to be able to do the research that I've done. A lot of you might not have that, but there's still, if you got time to sit down and watch Netflix or whatever your favorite movie on TV is, or whatever you're into, you have time to do this stuff. You can learn. You can do research. You can watch videos on horse training, horse trainers. Take it all with a grain of salt. Pay attention to what's going on in that video, because some of them, after a while, you might discover, you know what, that guy ain't worth watching anymore. Because I've come across quite a few like that basically, I won't say I didn't learn anything from them. I learned what not to do. That's what I learned from them. And after watching several of their videos, I decided, you know what, I'm not watching this guy anymore. I'm wasting my time, because I'm not learning anything. Now, and some of them too, because a lot of stuff that I do, it's just, to me, is common sense. It just makes sense. It's, like I said, I have this analytical mind, a sense of logic that, to me, there's a lot of things that I do that it just makes sense to do it that way. And I've always done it that way. And sometimes I didn't even know why I was doing it that way. It just seemed right. And years later, I would actually find articles, sometimes scientific articles or whatever, confirming my beliefs from a scientific standpoint. Or sometimes I would even find other horsemen that are doing things the same way I'm doing things. And, a lot of videos that I watch are not necessarily educational, but they confirm what I believe. And they're kind of just build me up a little bit, make me feel better about what I'm doing. Now, that's not always a good thing, to have other people agree with you, because they might be agreeing with the wrong things. But as it turned out, like I said, watching very good horsemen that have excellent methods and techniques do things the same as I do, that's very encouraging. It means I'm on the right track. Now, not everybody does everything identical too, and that's why one of the reasons in my videos I'm very hesitant to do demos, because I don't want anybody thinking they got to do things my way. I want you to figure it out for yourself and do what works for you and your horse, your situation, because I've said many times, there is more than one right way to do things. And what was really interesting, I watched a guy in person one time, and he was actually from another country. And when I was watching him, I almost jumped up and yelled, "Hey, you're doing it wrong," until I decided to shut up and pay attention, and I watched, and turned out, yeah, he did things different than I did. But if you watched the underlying principles behind what he was doing, it was actually the same as what I was doing. His methods and techniques were different, and some of them were even similar, but the way he did things was different all the time. And watching close, though, the underlying principle of why he was doing what he was doing and the end result and what he was trying to achieve was exactly the same. And yet, on the surface, it appeared to be extremely different than how I do stuff. So that's why, there is many, many right ways to do things. There's no one exact way that you must do things. There's a lot of guys out there who'll say, no, you got to do things my way. Well, they're actually trying to get your money. They charge $1,000 for a set of DVDs, and then you have to attend all their clinics and do their online training programs, get your certificates, which are actually worthless and meaningless, except to them, in their little cult that they create. And, well, sometimes those little cults are unintentional, too, because I can think of one guy in particular. He's got almost a cult following, and that's not his doing. I know it's not. It's just that, I don't know, it seems to be the nature of people that do stuff like that. But, well, anyhow, many years down the road, we get horses, and we start learning. Now, there's just something in my gut the whole time that just said there's got to be a gentler, better way of doing things, and that's just something that has always been in me. I can't say that was something anybody ever taught me. It was something I did kind of learn because working with dogs over the years, I trained quite a few dogs, and I always, I did some rather harsh things in the early days. Well, I didn't know any better. And as I discovered better ways of doing things, I discovered they were actually much more effective and worked better. And that was kind of when the little light bulb went on. And unfortunately, it was probably the last dog I owned when I really started figuring this stuff out. But I've just kind of transferred that to horses now. And I've discovered that, I don't care if I live to be 150. I'm not going to know everything. In fact, I don't think I'll know much of anything. Because even if you were just to educate yourself on one small area of the horse, it's, physical aspects, just the hooves, nutrition, training, conformation, breeding, colors. There's just so many different aspects about the horse that you can actually break down and specialize in. And just out of necessity as a horse owner, there's quite a few things I need to know at least a little bit about. And you need to educate yourself too, because a lot of people, for reasons I don't know why, just because their friends are doing it or whatever, they're feeding the wrong things to their horses. They're having them trimmed wrong. They're training them wrong. They're doing a lot of wrong things, and they're not doing it intentionally. They don't know any better, and because, the information isn't easy to get. You actually have to actively pursue the information to be able to get it. And, just because the majority of people are doing things a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Although sometimes that's an indicator that, maybe there's a reason that many people are doing it that way. Unfortunately, there's some that have been doing it that way for generations. And even just very recently, somebody who was a professional with a degree, I questioned a few things they were doing, and their answer to me was, been doing it that way for years. Well, that doesn't mean you were doing it right for years. Anyhow, but that's the kind of attitude that if they think they're been doing it right for years, they're not learning. And no matter how long I've been doing something a certain way, I'm always open to trying new things. I'm a little more set in my ways in some things, but that's because the reason behind what I'm doing and how I'm doing it is extremely sound in my mind, and I don't think there is another way that I should be doing it. But if somebody presents me with something that is significantly better, and I think about it and it really makes sense, because every once in a while this happens, even when I've really got my mind made up about something, somebody will present me some very hard evidence that says, that's not the best way, there is a better way. And that's one of the things that you'll always see at the beginning of my videos is, there is a better way, let's find it. And that is my goal, honestly. And as long as I'm alive, I'm going to try and improve. So my influences have been very, very many. I couldn't even begin to list them. And some of them, what's really interesting, every once in a while, just lately, there's one particular horseman in the UK that I've been watching, and he occasionally mentions names. I don't like name dropping or anything because it just colors people's views of what I'm doing. But he mentions an awful lot of names of people that I know of, that I respect, that I think are right, and are his influences. So it's kind of neat in that respect. But, I would like to think that many of the influences that I have are very good ones. And some of them aren't even really influences as much as affirmations, confirmations, whatever. It's like, even long after I made up my mind about how I wanted to do things, I'd come across somebody that, they'd say something or do something that just, yeah, right, that's what I wanted to see, that's what I wanted to hear. But you know what? They had some very sound reasoning behind what they were doing. They explained it and everything else, and it was something I was already doing. I already believed, but these guys who were some of the best of the best, they're doing it that way. I didn't know that was how you did it. It seemed right to me. So how did I learn? Just pay attention. Pay attention to the videos you watch. Pay attention to the horses around you. Spend as much time as you can. It's primarily up to you. You can do what I'm doing just by doing the same things that I'm doing, which is put the effort in to learn. Observe, pay attention. Like I said, I can't even get really good answers. I can't give real good answers. No, I just cannot give very good answers to a lot of the things that I do as to why I do them, because it just seems right to be as gentle and, with the horse as possible. And, I'd like to be even gentler yet if I could, but I've learned in recent years that there is a line you can only go so far, and then it goes from being gentle to spoiling. And there's a fine line there, and it's actually it's kind of a fuzzy line, very fine and fuzzy line, and it's very easy to cross over. And I've discovered that there's a lot of things that we do with horses that, our best intentions actually end up crossing the line. We don't realize we're doing it. It is absolutely necessary to have a certain level of firmness with the horse, because that's how horses communicate, and that's what works. And if you get too nicey nice with a horse, it doesn't respect you, and it won't listen to you. It won't take orders from you. It doesn't even feel comfortable with you, because it doesn't see you as a strong leader if you aren't firm, if you're too nice to the horse, if you're not firm. But then again, there's also the other end is, if you start yelling and getting pushy with the horse, then you're just a jerk, and the horse doesn't respect you either. And they don't actually feel comfortable with you. They feel quite uncomfortable with you. It goes the other way. And so, there's this place in there you got to find, and I've been spending years trying to find it. And, I don't expect it to be easy for you. A lot of the stuff I do, it's only because of, the amount of time I have put in to learning, and the opportunities that I've had that have made me who I am. And like I said, maybe it's a little bit the way I'm just built to begin with, the way my head works. And I've always had, a little connection with animals. I've always enjoyed animals. I love animals. I don't care what kind they are. Wild animals, domestic animals, I like them all. I understand what they do and why they do it, that sort of thing. And, a lot of it comes down to the one thing that I try and promote and teach is common sense. Looking at things, analyzing them, and like I said, never mind the what, figure out the why. And if, that's kind of the premise of everything I do is, I figure out why is that happening, and what can I do that's going to make that situation better? How can I fix that situation? And we get a little, as humans, we got this little egotistical thing where we have to be able to fix things. And, it's really tough when we don't have the answers. And honestly, I don't always have the answers. And what I do is exactly what you're going to have to do, and that's you're going to have to figure it out. I don't have answers all the time. In fact, there's a lot of answers I don't have. There's some general things how I do, and it's hard for me to do videos on, because sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing them, or there are things that are so subtle I don't really realize the importance of what I'm doing when it comes to working with a horse. But there are a lot of little things in how I do I take one step forward or one step back. Very tiny little things like that. It means body movement of less than a foot, or a couple decimeters, or whatever, I don't know, that much, okay? Body movement of that much can make all the difference between whether or not something works. There's all these little subtle things that we need to get that, they're really hard to teach sometimes. And sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it. I've got this attitude in me of how I need to do things, and I kind of apply it to everything I'm doing. And like I said, sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it. I just do it. And it's really hard to share that with you, as important as it is. And that's why a lot of the things that I do think to share with you actually don't seem like much, but they are actually very important things. Very subtle things, but extremely important. And I hesitate to repeat myself on them, which I probably should, though, because they're so important. But it just seems that they're such trivial little things that you're going to think I'm an idiot if I repeat myself on them. But, well, at least that's what I'm thinking. Maybe you wouldn't, because they're actually that important. They're just tiny little things, but they're super important little things. And there's so many of them that it's really hard to relate to you, these tiny little things. And a lot of it, like I said, I've learned from other horsemen, many different ones, not just one. There's a few individual ones that have been significant influences, but, not enough on any one person to even mention. I'm not even going to mention a name, but my influences have come from some of the best, but a lot of them. And if I started rattling off some of the names, you'd probably know quite a few of them. And it's really interesting too, because like I said, the people that have influenced me have also influenced the people that are influencing me. Not the same ones, but you know what I mean. So, and in this day and age with the internet and YouTube and stuff like that, there's more and more stuff out there all the time that if you want to become like me and learn like me, you can do it. You may spend many, many, many hours doing it. It may take a while, and it's not going to happen overnight. I was very fortunate in that for a period of time in my life, I had a lot of free time that allowed me to spend many hours a day, every single day, watching videos, reading, and learning. And that's kind of how I got where I am. And, well, even if I live to be 150, I'm still not going to be done learning. I've said many times I'm going to learn to the day I die. I'm completely convinced of that. And, even if I started learning when I was 6 years old, by the time I die, I still wouldn't know much. Not compared to what there is to be known. And so, don't think that you don't know anything. You probably know things I don't know. You probably know things that some of the best horsemen in the world don't know. Because nobody knows exactly the same stuff. And I've said this many times, is every single one of you have got unique experiences that allows you to, with your situation, your horse, your personality, you have unique experiences that only you know. Nobody else knows. Absolutely nobody knows what you know. There are other people that might know lots of things you don't know. But I'm going to bet and guaranteed that you know things that those people don't know, and you probably know something I don't know too. And that's just a fact of life. So I guess that kind of brings me up to date, but I suppose I can go on just a tiny bit more about the general principles behind what I do. Is I try to do things in order. It's like I've said, preventing problems is much, much easier than trying to fix problems. And that's something that I try to apply to everything. I've discovered that with dogs, and it applies to everything mechanical, electronical, you name it, social, absolutely everything. If you can prevent a problem, it's way, way easier than trying to fix it later on. And I've found the same to be true of horses because, I think part of that was really made clear because of the fact I keep getting problem horses. People keep giving me their problem horses. I keep working with other people's problem horses. I don't know why. It's just always been that way. I've always ended up with the problem horses that nobody else has time or facilities or knowledge to work with. And, I don't think that makes me any better. It's just, I'm maybe as a person more suited, and that would kind of go along with something I've heard before is, and you may have heard this too, is, somebody would talk about an untrainable horse. And I don't believe there's any such thing. And the people that say that are half true, though, because the horse is untrainable by them. And it doesn't mean the horse itself is actually untrainable, but it very well may be untrainable by them. They don't have what it takes to train that horse. And this does not necessarily discredit those individuals, because I'm sure the day is going to come when I'm going to be presented with a horse that I'm not going to be able to deal with. And actually, one I was working with recently, I was starting to think maybe, but I just backed off a little and kept doing things the way I was doing them, and eventually it worked. It didn't work quite the way I thought it was going to initially, but once it started working, it worked great. And so I really didn't have to change much, but I did have to tweak things a little. And that's one of the things about, a good horseman is you got to be constantly flexible, willing to change. And I've done a couple videos on the subject of experimenting. You got to constantly be trying new things to see what will or will not work, because that's just one of the things you got to do. You can't just pull out of the playbook and say we're going to do such and such, and that's what's going to solve our problem, because that might not be what works. And I've experienced this stuff firsthand in many different situations with horses and other animals and people and machines. That sometimes one size does not fit all. Okay, and I hate people that imply that stuff. And there are actually a lot of clinicians and trainers and such out there that they're one-trick ponies. They insist on there is one way to do it. No, there's more than one way to do things. And in fact, I insist that you learn more than one way of doing things, because one size does not fit all. And that's one of the many things that I've learned over the years. And a lot of the stuff I've learned doesn't even have to do with horses. It's just like the concepts of figuring out problems. One size does not fit all. You don't have the same solution to every problem. Although I've discovered that with horses, actually, there are a lot of problems that do have the same solution. It's kind of interesting, but I won't elaborate on that right now. It would get confusing. But you can do what I do. Just use your thought process to figure out what the problem is, and using that same thought process is, look around you at all the different ways that different people do things and figure out what makes the most sense. Use common sense, analyze the problem, figure it out, what is going to work. And remember, horses don't think the way we do. You have to put it into their perspective of, when you do something, how is the horse going to perceive that? Is that going to be effective in helping you with your problem? These are the things that you got to understand. So, I do things in order. I take things a step further than what a lot of people do. When it comes to getting a horse to a point where you can ride it. I've said before a few times recently, by the time I ride the horse, I'm done, because I teach it almost everything it needs to know to be ridden on the ground before I ever get on its back. And it's not a guaranteed fix, but it can certainly help prevent the rodeo from happening. The odds of the horse blowing up and freaking out and spooking, bolting, rearing, bucking, all those things on the first ride are much, much less the way I do things, because I do so many things before riding the horse that prepares it for being ridden. All of its cues that it needs to know to be ridden, I've already taught it. It's had the saddle on it several times. It's had my weight on it several times. It's taken cues from me in a higher position. There's just, as much as possible. Some things just aren't quite possible, but, as much as possible, I teach it everything it needs to know to be ridden before I ride it. And to this day, a lot of people do not do that. Very few people do, in fact. And, that's where I'm really in the minority, is that, even the guys that have pretty decent training methods and are pretty gentle with horses aren't as thorough as I am prior to riding the horse. Not far off, but I don't think that there's very much left. And that's why, if you've seen some of my recent videos where I've ridden Clint, you see how good he is. And in those videos, he's only got maybe 5 hours on his back. It's not like a well-experienced horse. And all of that was achieved because of what I did on the ground. So, to me, how did I end up getting to that point? Well, it just made sense to me to do it. It's like, when I get on him, that's what I want. When I get on, I don't want a rodeo. I'm not a young man, and I'm not a bronc rider. I don't want that. I want what you saw from Clint in some of my recent videos, and particularly the one that I used, a link to my ad that I had for him about change. Particularly in that video, you get a real good example. It's not everything. He knows more than that even, but it's a good example of his demeanor and the things he knows and that sort of thing. And that gives you an idea of what I try to create before I ever get on the horse. That's what I want. Those are my expectations. So I'm thinking, well, how am I going to go about it? And I figure it out, you know. And that's basically, you know, long and short, actually, I think that's basically much of what I do and how I do it. It has evolved and come into fruition simply because of that's what I want. That's what my expectations are. And, you know, I think that there's probably a lot of people out there that would like that as well from, you know, what I see, you know, the comments people make to me when they see my horses, they would like to have that too. And it's like, well, you can have that, but it would mean you changing. And they don't want to do that. So they don't get the same thing. Oh well. But, you know, if you see what I do and how I do it and everything, it's basically just an evolution of things I've learned that I've, you know, taken and tweaked a little bit to my personal liking so that I can get what I would want, my expectations in a horse, what I would personally be real happy with. That's what I'm going to try and achieve in a horse. So basically, even if I train a horse for somebody else, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I would do for me because that's my standard. That's what I think is the right thing. And yeah, some of it I learned from other people, but a lot of it I just figured out for myself. I take bits and pieces from everywhere, and I put it all together. And over the years, we just keep accumulating more and more. And, you know, we're still learning. I'm still learning new things. There was one particular thing that, you know, even just recently, I watched some guy's video. I don't even know who the guy is, but he did something different than I do. And I thought it seemed a little odd, but I thought, you know what, there doesn't seem to be anything really wrong with what he's doing. So I had one horse that the way I did things wasn't working. So I thought, well, I'll try this guy's method. And it worked. It seemed a little odd, but it worked. And it doesn't hurt the horse, so why not? So if it's effective, if it works for you, because, you know, like I said, you know, even the best methods, you're going to find a horse that doesn't work on. I can guarantee it. You know, I have. And the more, you know, this is kind of a comment I've made before, is the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more you have at your disposal that you can use when you run into a tight spot where your more common methods don't work. You got something else you can pull out and try. You know, when I say toolbox, I'm talking figurative, not literal. Here's your toolbox up here. It's all the methods and techniques that you've got stashed away in your head that you can apply if you need to. And, you know, like I said, a lot of these things, you're going to make them up. You're going to figure them out for yourself. You're not going to learn them from other people. Some you can, but a lot you can't. And sometimes you even have to take things from 3 or 4 or 5 different guys and kind of blend them together to make something that works for you. Because that's what I've done. So I guess, you know, in answer to my question, what do I do? How do I do it? Why do I do it? Who influenced me? How did I get here? Well, pretty simple, actually. Well, okay, it's a long story. I've been yapping for a while. But, you know, and in a way, it's probably a good thing that I grew up in the city because I didn't grow up indoctrinated with this is the way it's always been done. Dad did it this way. And why did Dad do it that way? Well, because Grandpa did it that way. Why did Grandpa do it that way? Well, because Great-Grandpa did it that way. You know, none of that kind of stuff. I came into it with a clean slate and decided for myself what was right and wrong and figured out what would or would not work and how I wanted to do things. And, you know, by having a conscience and a little bit of a second sense for this stuff, or third sense, or what, a bit of a sense for this stuff anyhow, some kind of sense. Common sense? Horse sense? No. Can't be common. Not many people have it. But anyhow, you know, just using my sense, what seems right, what works. You know, I've taken, amalgamated all these different things that I see and experience, put them all together. No one individual is my mentor. I don't model myself after anybody. And it's something else that I've said too is, you know, don't try and be a me. Be a good you. You know, I don't want you to be a me. And I'm not going to be somebody else either. I'm not going to be Mr. X. I'm not going to mention any names, but I'm not trying to be somebody else. I'm trying to be me, and I'm trying to be the best me I can be, because if I try and model myself after somebody else, I'm going to be limited to what I can learn from them. Whereas if I simply try to be the best me, I can do everything that they do and more. I can be even better than them. You understand that? Does that make sense? If you try to be the best you that you can be, instead of trying to be like me, you can be better than me. And that, well, I mean, I'd like to think I'm good, but I'm not, trying to put myself on a ladder where I'm in a, one of the top positions. I don't really care. I'm not even on the ladder. I'm over there. And it's saying, hey, good job. You learned, oh, hey, that was kind of neat. You did something. I've never seen that done before. Huh, I'm going to give that one some thought. That's just the way it works. You don't, and that's actually something I've noticed amongst very good horsemen. They tend to encourage one another, even if they do have different methods and ways of doing things. Like I know a couple of guys that are in fact friends, and they admire each other. They have great respect for each other, and yet they do things quite differently. They're both, in my opinion, good teachers. So they're very good at communicating what they know to people. But again, that depends on who you are, because everybody learns a little bit differently. So, that's one of the reasons I don't mention names either, because, you might think this guy's really good, and I've actually seen situations where, one person thought this guy was great. I thought this guy was great. They think this guy's better than this guy. I think this guy's actually better than this guy. But honestly, they're both really good. But because that person and me learn differently, that's one of the reasons that we're influenced differently. Now, if you can learn from me, great, if I work for you. But don't try and be me. Try and be better than me. That's what I want. I want to see people that I can learn from. I want you to get so good that I can learn from you, because I know you already know something I don't know. And, well, if I don't shut up, I'm going to be talking for hours. So I'm going to wrap this video up now. How did I get where I am and do what I do and all that stuff? Honestly, I can't say there's any one thing. I've just learned from a whole lot of experiences, a lot of things I've watched, a lot of other horsemen. Horses themselves have been phenomenal teachers for me, and a lot of it is also common sense, because like I said, I have an analytical mind. I can look at a situation and kind of look at what's going to work and how figure it out. I'm a troubleshooter. That's what I do. And both, like I said, not working with horses prior to that, mechanical, electronical, a lot of different things, I've done troubleshooting on. So working with horses, honestly, I know this sounds silly comparing a horse to a machine, but honestly, there's not a lot of differences when it comes to solving problems and fixing things and programming things and making things work. Is you have to figure out what the situation is and what the parameters are you got to work within, and how you can do it effectively that's going to work effectively with the least amount of damage. Same kind of thing, you can't have a machine flying apart or your electronics going up in smoke. And you got to use those same ideas with your horse as well. So that's how I got where I am, is I used my head. Okay, that's the majority of it, is look at the situation, analyze it, figure it out, and you too can easily be as good as me or better. In fact, I'm really hoping you're going to be better, because the world could use a lot more good horsemen. Have a good day.